Welcome, everyone. The time is 2 p.m., and we'd like to say on this beautiful, sunny, 80-degree day, how wonderful it is to have you present, right? See how, Jean, the mindset? Wait a minute, did I go to the wrong webinar? Wait a minute, is it not winter, cold, and blustering? It very much is a solid introduction to what we're going to be really reflecting on and having as a general theme and goal is as we're leaving 2025, what perspective is going to be important for us as participants to be bringing into the future? And I think this particular topic tends to have a lot of baggage associated with it. There's a lot of bias, there's a lot of stereotype, there's a lot of negativity, there's some positivity, there's a lot of thoughts and emotions that are really tied to the fact that for the first time in history, every generation is represented in the workforce. And I know when we put together the marketing for this event, it tends to get very zealous about the incredibly tangible results that will come from our experience today. But for me, as a brain based coach, and certainly introducing our esteemed team, which good news, Jean, you're one of.
Yes, that is the good news.
I think it's incredibly important that if we just walk away from our hour today with challenging ourselves and honoring ourselves to recognize that we're all coming to this particular event with a perspective. And we're going to talk about where your unique perspective came from and how through an experience like this and a variety of other experiences, and hopefully looking at this as kind of really moving into more of what can be created if we get outside of our comfort zone and put ourselves in positions that allow us to challenge more of this fixed mindset. So I'm going to just save your introduction, Jean, just for when we have the slide up as well. What I'd like to do is really kind of kick this off with we're one of a half a dozen companies in the country that look at the brain as it's in direct relativity to work. Often this amazing mechanism that acts like a muscle and is an organ has this overwhelming responsibility to keep us protected from social and from physical harm. And it uses this storage system as a means to decipher what is friend and what is foe. And I think that very much ties in a nice bow. Happy Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays. The fact that what neuroscience means is looking at our species in its totality and being able to predict what's going to relate to an impactful experience at work and what is going to take us down more of an unfortunate or hazardous road. Often when we think about the brain, we think about mental illness, we think about mental wellness, we think about traumatic brain injuries, we think about a variety of things that tend to be more frailties versus saying, how do we work within our human design to get to a more bold outcome versus working against it. And I think generations certainly signify how we can do that. If I can share some anecdotes in terms of an organization that we all know and most of us certainly love that really prescribe to this deep understanding, it would be the Buffalo Bills. If you listen very, very closely to how Sean McDermott speaks, Josh Allen, and the teammates as a whole, you will literally see them use words that very much are in relation to this growth mindset. I know as a long time Bills fan, there's times where we learned a lot from this, and this was a great experience, and this is what we can move into the future, can be incredibly frustrating when we're trying to get to that ultimate goal and that ultimate prize. But I think, again, it's just such a more healthy dynamic when we look at whatever circumstance we're in from a perspective of being a victor versus a victim. And again, that's certainly something we're going to explore here. Why did we take this approach as a moving into our third generation in Western New York is because through AI, through technology, I think the overwhelming theory is to use math, to use data, to use science as our guide. And what neuroscience does is it has very distinct measures to it. Our clients come to us with very specific goals, and we're able to measure those outcomes in a variety of ways. One of the most happy and productive is how it adds to our bottom line. So working again bears repeating within who we are as a species versus against it. So here's Jean. On the screen.
On the screen I talk there. Too.
You talk too. Yeah.
I actually talk. Yep.
Yeah. And you are welcome, as are our participants, to go into the chat room. Certainly write any questions or comments that they'd like to include. I know you're comfortable in saying, hey, can we hold the fort there for a minute as you're seeing questions that kind of relate. Happy to take those in real time. I know we have some time at the end that we're planning on chatting around as well. But I want to share certainly the gentlemen that are not with us. One is certainly near and dear to my heart. Dr. Eric, see, caught you, right? Because you thought I was going to go to my son. You thought I was naturally going to be biased towards that. Get you thinking in these different ways. Certainly, we are so fortunate to have a next-gen scientist who has his PhD in neuroscience, who wants to give back to the working population in the way that he has, not only within the confines of the consulting work that he does in partnership with us, but a variety of initiatives that he's contributing his knowledge to. Great example of somebody who is taking his education and moving it in a direction that has a far-reaching effect to it. So we certainly applaud him, and we'll share some of those details. My son, who graduated from Emory University with his PhD in behavioral psychology, he very much is not only into the science aspect, but he works intimately with AI in predicting workforce frailties. So it is so scary to watch him as he evaluates a series of projects that happen within a company. And Gene, he can almost predict with crazy certainty what the absenteeism will be after a big project.
Oh, that's incredible.
After an acknowledgement, after somebody is disengaged. I mean, you talk about really getting into the heart of this math and science. He has a great capacity to do that with both his coding and artificial intelligence prowess. So certainly, again, something that we're going to be referencing in our chat today. So just a little bit about us, just a little bit about our credentials, and you can rest assured that anything that we're sharing with you, when you're working with scientists, they tend to be very funny if we take liberties or exaggeration, which often kills my good storytelling, right, Jean? Because
absolutely. I like to say they're the book smarts, we're the street smarts, right?
There we go. I love it.
We have life and humor.
Yeah, there you go. So just so you become familiar with our approach, What you will not get within the confines of any type of training that we do is a science class. So when people hear, oh, you're a brain-based organization, they can conjure up themes of lobotomies and other things that could make them in a very, very uncomfortable place in space. But we use metaphors because from a training perspective, from a stickiness, it tends to really resonate with people. And it's safe to say that this is one of our most famous. What we like to kick off with is self awareness, and that is the bane for everything that we do. And you, again, are coming and spending some time with us, and your perspective was developed through nature and through nurture. And what we do, and most of the companies we train literally use this tool, this symbol, as a way to converse internally, your filing cabinet. And even though so many of the younger generations are not familiar with it, because they don't really use it because it tends to be more of a technology tool today, they've seen it and they've opened it and they get a vision and view that there is a Pendaflex, an organizer, many different folders in there. Ideally, it's alphabetical, and it very much mimics the fact that you have an individual storage system. No two storage systems are the same. Your nature and nurture, had you even had an identical twin, would still be different. And so understanding that we have the commonality that we are a pattern making machine inside of our filing cabinet, we make sense of the world through this mechanism. It allows us to very much understand that we weren't just fresh, born into this world without a very vast download to begin with. Not only do your parents contribute, but what we know, especially through the work that my son has been involved in, your grandparents contribute deeply to your perspective, your great grandparents contribute, your great great grandparents can contribute. And often it's within that micro DNA that it gets stored as a way in which to protect you. So if you had food insecurity within your lineage, it is not unusual that you would have picked that up as a form of protection in the brain's infinite wisdom to keep you safe. So I think that's important, so important for people to realize what's unique about them. And often, and I know I experienced this, I felt more of a connection to my grandmother than I actually did within the realms of my mom and my dad. There were certain traits and features that her and I shared. And again, I just think we don't take that time to think about why we see the world the way that we do. And that's why we give more of an assessment that is rooted in neuroscience, because it steps you out of your personal bias and gives you more of an objective view of what your starting point is. Not to be self-loathing, not to be self-critical, but to be self-loving and to be self-understanding. So when we look at this filing cabinet and we're talking about generations, I love to challenge you to think about, what have you stored? What opinions have you stored, positive or negative? What perspectives do you have when you think about identifying people? What perspectives do you have about promoting people? And I ask you that in direct correlation to 2026. Is it still effective? Are we bringing into this massive age of technology, largely spurred on by artificial intelligence? Is it still going to serve us well into 2026? And similar to a hard drive or a computer system or a smartwatch or our phone, we do these automatic upgrades. When was the last time you really thought about, should there be some filing cabinet cleanouts? Should there be some ways in which you should test if you aren't being human by falling prey to having an interview and liking that person and feeling like they get it and there's so much in your tribe? But are they actually the right person for the position, or are they just more right for you? If you're interviewing, I know we've had some candidates who said, "Oh gosh, I can't wait to get on this and learn about it because I find that I'm interviewing with other generations." Are you spending time thinking about what's in that filing cabinet? And how are my responses being interpreted? And is it a way in which I want my brand to shine? Am I communicating in a way I prefer to versus observing that person who's interviewing you and making the appropriate adjustments so that you and I can really meet in the middle and have a great conversation? What are your thoughts, Jean, as you're nodding through this?
Yeah, I'm really kind of as you're speaking through this, I'm really kind of picturing the audience and what their takeaways could be. And what I'm hearing from you, Joan, is step one. We're learning that there's no two brains that think alike. And the first step is really starting with self-awareness
Mhm.
and really taking step two, taking an audit of their own storage system. Because you can't really build the next generation of leaders until you really understand you as a leader, if you're the one mentoring that leader, and vice versa, if you're looking to build yourself to be that next generation. So I just thought it was very impactful to kind of summarize it in that fashion, where I'm hearing right now, step one, self-awareness. Step two is taking an audit of your own storage system when you're looking at building that next gen.
Yeah, I love what you did. I do.
Mhm.
I think it's very cohesive because it very much leads us to this next slide. And this next slide is very much about, if you again looked at your brain as this personal Wikipedia, this personal Google. And I tend to lean towards Wikipedia because the great thing is you can rewrite this. Very similar to Wikipedia. I hate when people say, change is impossible. You can't teach an old dog new tricks. Like, we have completely and totally scientifically debunked that theory through the greatness of neuroplasticity, regardless of your age, you can take a different perspective. And what I really heard you summarize, Jean, is as you're doing that audit, if you think that millennials are this, fill in the blank, what you have to understand is this shortcut is going to take you to that road. So if you have a negative impression of a baby boomer, it's going to take you down that road that's filled with more negativity. And that's why the generational work that we do is so different. I've been on a multitude of great information about each generation and what that looks like. But no one has talked about what happened within that particular generation. How do you feel about that particular generation? Because if you don't own that through self awareness and say, oh, the baby boomers drive me crazy because guess what? I have to reboot their computer. You don't understand, then that's going to be your automatic shortcut. And I want to emphasize here that although the brain is a very, very small percentage of your overall being, if you put your fists together like this, that's the size of your brain, but it has an overwhelming responsibility. And just using this Wikipedia, it takes 20% of your energy, just using your storage system. Now imagine if you've got to throw a growth mindset at this. Imagine if you have to break a pattern. It's exhausting to do
Yeah.
that. So I think, again, it's important for you to understand that we respect that anybody who goes on a journey to be the best version of themselves, someone who can really sit down and say, here's my strengths, here's my opportunities for growth, and here's a plan for my gap.
I'm going to pause you there, John, because we have a great question in the Q&A,
Okay.
and it says, do you suggest that leadership teams take any types of formal personnel assessments to get a baseline of your brain's tendency? Can you speak to that?
Yeah, I just think doing a self audit, and what I'll do is let me just, when we got into more of what these generations look like, I'll kind of expand on that question. But I think even being is honest in looking at these different generations, and anybody who, Gina, I think, did you put on the last slide? Do they have like our contact information? They
Oh, I'm
do.
sure we do have it on the last
Yeah.
slide. And if not,
Don't, yeah. Don't
yeah,
hesitate to reach
yeah, we
out to
do.
us and we could send you these slides. It's absolutely no problem. And what I would almost do is I would almost do like a scoring kit for yourself and really have a fun conversation of when you think about the baby boomers, what's the first thought? Don't filter it.
Mm-hmm.
Like you hear me say ad nauseum, I'm in this generation and literally I'm much more comfortable hanging out more with people that are in their 30s and 40s just because they're less jaded. They tend to be more growth mindset. And I'm not just giving a biased review, I keep a lot of data on them being comfortable, just really spitballing and brainstorming. So even if they use this and they looked at said baby boomers and use this slide in a variety of different ways, what percentage of the workforce are baby boomers?
Mm-hmm.
Because I'll tell you, this is a generation that has so much intellectual property, but getting them to download it from their filing cabinet is like out of their cold, dead hands. Very, very difficult to give this generation to give up control because it causes them such social pain. So, looking at your workforce and saying, hey, what percentage of baby boomers do we think we should have? And what do we currently have? Like, really use this as a litmus test because when you're looking at Buffalo, New York, multi generational success is incredibly rare. It is less than 10% of companies that make it into the third generation, like we have, Gene. We're actually
Mm-hmm.
part of a 7% club of companies that do. Our
Yeah.
last competitor went out of business last January. So, looking at the baby boomers and saying, why are they the way they are? What did they grow up with? What trauma did they endure? Did they have a war in their background? All of those things get downloaded in that filing cabinet, and they're going to react and connect from that perspective. So, this is a generation that tends to give a ton of advice, and it's largely based on their particular point in history. And when you look at this whole Gen X, again, think about what was happening with this whole Gen X. This is when you saw a ton of mothers going back to work. The framework of a latchkey kid, getting those young adults who got used to finding the key, opening the door, making their own food. There was a lot of independence that we didn't think about during the time that they were raised, but very, very much is showing up within the confines of the workforce. We don't connect how, when, and how we were raised shows up at work. And
Mm-hmm.
again, I wonder how many organizations, when they're identifying people, think about this. How many
Let alone the major events that have happened, right? And now we live in a time where anyone that's being, anyone that's younger as we get to the younger generations, they have other things that they're competing with technology. When I think of Gen X and then the next generation of, 9/11, and then I'm trying to think of what I experienced, the hostages, right? And then the first things of when terrorism was coming and how we were born and how we were raised. No, you're absolutely right. It has not been connected to how we show up at work. And that is such a critical component because you could be trying to elevate an individual in your organization, but there's a bottleneck that is causing them not to be the best version of themselves. And that's why, when it comes to brain-based methodology, it's the secret sauce to developing your key leaders, rising and or current.
And and again, we'll certainly get into this as we continue to spout more growth mindset ideas. When we had a manufacturer that spends a great deal of time in a specific part of propellers, and there used to be a couple universities in the country that literally you graduated with more of that particular engineering knowledge. And we were brought in and said, listen, I mean, no one here is qualified to teach these people. And we found a gentleman from Boston who was retired, had a vast amount of experience, didn't want to be retired. His wife was like, hey, find a hobby. What do you mean it's in Buffalo, New York? Sounds great to me. And literally came and set up a little university within the confines of this manufacturing firm with a curriculum and all those other things. But again, often what we do is we say, well, there's no talent out there, and oh, there isn't the work ethic. We use words that are coming from our filing cabinet or somebody else downloaded them into our filing cabinet. And the truth of the matter is you will see in innovative companies that they are recognizing that the faces are changing. And how then do they use this generational knowledge to make a decision about what their workforce looks like? And I think in most of the companies that we begin with, you find these very traditional patterns and hierarchies. Of course you do, because that's the way we are as a species. But what you see in those companies and all different companies that are incredibly innovative is their staple statement is what got us here will not get us there.
Mm-hmm.
And that's okay. We have a lot to be successful with, but if we're going to continue to experience this dynamic growth, we obviously have to be looking at this very, very differently. And I think that's the difference when we're talking about generations. How do each of them align to our people plan that fits like a transparency over our business plan?
And it
And
doesn't even have to be dynamic growth, Joan. It just is competing with the ever-changing world we live in that requires this type of thought.
yeah, and I wanted to give an example of when you're looking at a specific industry here, and it's the largest share of today's accounting workforce. And we could take that word accounting and we could shift it into a variety of different occupations. We could look at this in terms of information technology. We could look at this in terms of other service industries. And I think, again, when was the last time you did an audit for your company and said, out of 100%, here's where we are per generation? And even though they're the largest share, and I wanted to play it out with a particular industry just so you had some fodder to kind of compare and contrast your organization to, we have the largest share, but we're also seeing the highest turnover. And what is that a result of? And I think so much it's a result of we don't need to map out a career map for people because in accounting, when I was in accounting, said the baby boomer, this is the way we handled things. We grizzled on a steak, spit out the bone. We worked until, the next morning. And this is what we did here, right? And
There's
now
no
these
crying in
rotten,
baseball. Yep.
yeah, now these rotten millennials who I don't know want to have a life, shame on them. This is what I think about them. But again, are we looking and making sure that the dynamics of where every generation is, what do they need? And I think if we go back to the Buffalo Bills, Gene, this is what we're talking about. They meet them where they are.
Yep.
They're very much meeting them where they are. They don't, I can assure you, they don't complain about, where the millennials are. They're not looking at this next generation and saying, look at these rotten, what they're
Well, just look
doing
at
is,
even the young Coleman, right? Just look at him, right? They have a set of core beliefs and values that they live by, and it's how we behave, even at the Buffalo Bills. And if you go outside of how you behave, you're going to get repercussions from it. So, he was sidelined because he didn't behave in the way that was set their core values and what they do day in and day out. So I just think you're what you're speaking about is on par, because it really requires an organization to bring the team together through those core values.
well, and again, I think it's innovative. On par almost makes it seem like many organizations have figured this
Good
out.
point.
And I think, when you look at being innovative and looking at the generations and where they are, how much of our old practices do we expect them to adhere to be motivated by, to be engaged by when they were raised so differently? I raised my children very, very differently than I was raised. So their outcome was incredibly different. I mean, I didn't get the opportunity that my son got to travel the world. I didn't get that, right? I was literally so jealous of my friends who went to Geneseo. I mean, again, I can't make this stuff up. I mean, that's my truism. So, as we're looking at the difference, I think again, how much are we bringing it down to our people planning, and how many strategic planning sessions have we gone through where I'm like, that's great. You're going to increase your dollars, your volume, your goal, or whatever that number is by X%. Who are the people?
Hmm.
What do they look like? What generation are they from? How does this all break down to make this reality? And I can assure you, again, if you look at the Buffalo Bills more from this generational perspective, you'll really see in a very real time type of way how it comes to light, because they're thinking about all these things. And I love the example that you gave. How many people that are on this call are working for companies that know the rules? Is
Hmm.
there a code of ethics? Is there a
Right.
code of behaviors? I
Do you
mean,
understand the vision, the mission? Are you living them? Yeah.
yeah.
I put in the chat, do you have a unified way in which you're raising the children? Right. So if you're
Mm-hmm.
going to try to build the next gen leader, you have to have that unified vision and mission and way that which one could live by. So
And again,
Joan, I have a question for you in the
sure.
Q&A. When you look at Gen Z, how does constant social media how does constant social media factor into the current younger workforce?
I only because from a math and science perspective, Eric and I did a session together. We did like a general forum. I don't know, it was like 6, 8 months ago. And what really bothered me about what Eric shared at that point is that, so your logic, this greatness, this frontal lobe, takes a long time to bake. The difference between us and primates is the baking. A gorilla does not bake its brain for the amount of time it takes a human. So obviously, we're a more evolved species. So that emotional piece obviously is running rampant. And social media has figured out neuroscience to such a degree that they are using it to prosper in ways that I have very, very, very little respect and hope for when you look at the level of self-harm, when you're looking at just so many different attributes in this generation, especially when you think about the pandemic. What he was saying is that social media is now stunting that frontal lobe growth. So before, where we saw it mid 20s to latter 20s, Eric said we're seeing now 28 to 32 for that full maturity. So what I don't like about the whole theory of social media is what it's actually doing to that frontal lobe and its development of its frontal lobe. And again, I just think that that is a reality. And I think you're going to see, like, I see the difference even in how my daughter is raising my grandkids, because she's very, very aware of it. And so I would say that when you're looking at this Gen Z and the way in which they've engaged, I even think as part of the interview process, it would be an interesting, and again, anybody who knows me knows I'm not a compliant person, so I don't know how this fits into laws. But I would be curious about what their engagement is with social media, because I think when you do, like, even like AI, when you get somebody to think for you, it's definitely going to have an impact on your critical thinking.
Mm-hmm.
There's no if, ands, or buts about it, because you're not problem solving. It's letting you problem solve. It's problem solving for you. So I
And
definitely think when you're looking at social media and the impact that it's had, I don't find a lot of positiveness from it.
yeah, and what I will share with you as a person who has a young adult from high school and college age, what I'm noticing just from her behaviors and what she demonstrates from what her friends communicate to me, she's not big on social media, right? She'll look at for research, right? So, if you're looking at how it affects it in the workplace, I would be mindful if you have a good percentage of that age group, you may use social media to educate them in regards to your policies and procedures, but you have your own channel because they're already gaining information and research through social media. We like when the internet came around, we went to Google. Right now we go to chat. The only research that Anna does is on TikTok. She will research every type of product. The next thing she's going to buy, it has to be research on TikTok first. So I just think it all depends on how it integrates in your organization, and that young generation will be using that type of medium to learn from.
Yeah, and I think it's a good point. I think as you're looking at people, I hear what you're saying, because you're kind of reiterating, kind of meet them where they are, right? And they're
Correct. Yeah.
using this vehicle. But then I would really go back and say too, like, what is the people plan, and how do you give them experiences that get them less involved with a device and more involved with people? Because I think that you being able to have people skills is going to be the differentiator when it comes to AI. Like,
Yeah.
even for us, I mean, we sit down and we're heavily involved in very complicated issues within the confines of our client base. And what I see is that if you have somebody who's so engaged in social media and then feels uncomfortable going to a restaurant and putting in an order, I don't know where those people work. So
Hmm.
these are the type of things. What I would almost encourage is, if that's the case, how do you give them experiences that get them more interested and connected? Because we're very much a connection species. And I'd rather be building connections with other humans than devices.
Yeah, no, I completely understand. And this actually leads us to the next question in the chat. Well, not in the chat, in the Q&A. One thought was this specific organization struggles to attract and retain certain generations more than others. Could you, in this webinar, state what best practices can be in place when addressing that gap?
Yeah, I think that data point, like when we went to a very, very large construction company, I mean, it was crazy. I think we had an 83% turnover. It was one of the worst turnovers I've ever seen. And they gave me their opinion. And of course, it was from their filing cabinet. It wasn't from their company's filing cabinet. They had none of the company data figured out. So we came in and we did an audit on exactly what was happening. Like we looked at what timeline were they turning over. In this particular case, it was in the first 90 days. We went onto the job site. We saw the people that were training them, how abusive they were on the job site. It was like pledging for a really, really rough fraternity. So we saw a lot of problems and issues there. And so we then got with groups of people, and frankly, I know you remember this, Jean, but obviously our audience would be unaware. We offered a $100 gift card to Amazon, and we basically touched base with the people that have left, and we said, listen, we'd like to give you this gift card if you can give us, we're an independent consultant, unfiltered, and we collected incredibly rich data from that. So between all of the data collection that we did, we were able to very much circle in on the problem. So our identification changed, our onboarding changed, our retention. I think our 2025 data, they probably are somewhere between 10 to 12%. So we took off 70 points onto there. But we built a system that was more in line with the future of the company in relation to the generation. I think that all comes to say you've got to be real about what the problems are.
Yeah,
You
and I would
know,
think to piggyback off of that, addressing that gap is I think what you just highlight is doing a talent brand audit where maybe you don't need to have all generations in the workforce, depending on the product, depending on what you're doing. Maybe you need a certain level of generation that is more important than the other. But doing a comprehensive talent brand audit with your website, what your past, your present, and your future employees think about you, I think is critical.
well, and I guess what I would say at the top, and this is what we often find is even when you do something, you got to get buy-in from the top. And if those guys at the top are saying something different than somebody else is saying, and it's often different than what HR is saying or some
Hmm.
other type of principle, well, then guess what? The human brain just thinks you're full of crap. So if the top is saying, yeah, HR has got this initiative and they're saying this, but guess what? This generation just sucks. Well, then guess what? None of that. You've got to get buy-in at the top. And that's something that it's nice for us because we have every generation in our workforce. So I'm clearly more of a senior level person. We have the generation below, we have the generation below, we have the generation below. And in our interns, we even have that generation represented. So we very much apply our generational knowledge based on the customers that we're sharing. So I think that is so, because I'm telling you, we put so much pressure on these younger generations, but we don't understand that they are in a completely different situation than we are in. And, caring for kids and aging parents, there's never been a generation that has so many things that they're having to deal with. I mean, political discourse, climate change, economic uncertainty. Is it going to be a recession? We have never had this much turmoil. And the sad news is our brain is not designed for cumulative stress. It is designed for fight or flight. Social pain, move. Physical pain, move. Very much like a deer, it is not meant for you to continue to build upon it to the extent you're running into anxiety disorders, certain forms of depression. There's just that cumulative impact. And what we do is all of these reactions are human, but we help you build the tools to counteract them. And I think that's the thing in that understand that emotions are as natural as digesting food. By the same token, when you are activated, how do you then respond to it in a way that keeps your nervous system sound and the people around you sound? And we don't know enough of those techniques to be able to do that.
Yeah, and I just think about like when you build the next gen leaders, so often with the clients that I'm involved with you and the projects that we work on, it is very stressful to take the time to do a knowledge dump and knowledge transfer when you're looking at succession planning and raising the next gen leaders. So, how do we mitigate the stress for the leaders that are looking to exit out versus the leaders we're trying to build?
But I wonder if that isn't just part of our pattern. Like, I hear what you're saying, but I just think about something as trite as, my husband and I went to Disney World, didn't have a whole lot of plans. I had no idea that there was Disney experts. Didn't know I didn't have to wait on a line for 17 hours because that's the way it was back in the day. You just went and stood. Like I didn't know any of those things, right? And now I would totally do it different. I just think often when we think about business planning, we don't think about people planning. And this generational is a byproduct of that. That is all part of our people planning. And I don't think it's as daunting as it seems. It's just really being able to take that breath and say, if we're going to achieve this, we just did this for a $200 million manufacturer in the sales at the retreat. The gentleman who was the VP of sales, came up and here was this human capital plan, et cetera, et cetera. Well, I just did a quick calculation as I was sitting in the audience, and he was short 9 people. So it was like on paper, it looked amazing, but anybody who took out an abacus could have figured out he didn't have enough people to do that job.
Mhm.
Just looking at his org chart, you could tell that. So I don't think it's as daunting. If you have a plan to grow, you need to have a plan of who's going to administer it.
Mhm.
And I think just looking at this and this is what I say to my clients, listen, you could be part of the 93% that don't make it to that next generation. But I can tell you, anybody we work with is part of the 7%. We're
Mhm.
very proud to be part of the 7%. We have never lost an organization that was interested in doing this type of work. And it's all based on if you were going on a trip, what would you do? Do I want a warm climate? Do I want to wear my bathing suit? I need suntan lotion. Do I need a planner? What does that all look like? We would never show up at the airport. We need to come to the reality that AI is here and it's going to move incredibly fast. And we know that the workforce is going to look different. And if we look at Amazon that said, listen, we're going to lose these amount of jobs, and here are our job postings. And what they did was they looked at the amount of jobs that they were losing, and then they offered apprenticeship programs for the people who could fix their robots, who could do technical work in a whole other way. So by the time you looked at their net outcome, their workforce really hadn't changed that dynamically. They had just moved people from one skill level to another. And if we were
Mhm.
in Toronto right now, Jean, and you know that because we spend a great deal of time there, that's why HR tends to fall under accounting because it's a more analytical function.
Mhm.
And organizational development is looked at as a separate entity. They're building the skills, but HR is really getting to be a pivotal part of guiding organizations and how many people they need. What do they look like? And I just think understanding the generations from this new reflection, ideally, of just a snippet of what we've shared here, I hope that after our short time together, people are just walking away saying, wow, you know what? I've just never thought of it. I just never looked at it this way. And I just think it's such a beautiful and poetic time of year to understand that you're controlling this narrative, or is it controlling you?
I agree. And that leads to my summation of step 6, which is make sure your people plan is in alignment with your business goals. We have another question in the Q&A. Any tips for how to help a silent generation entrepreneurial leader understand the importance of creating the people plan and create a succession plan? So it's someone in the silent generation and he's an entrepreneur.
And again, I just, if you can spend time thinking about his or her filing cabinet, I mean, when you look at that, it is largely because the whole thought of this is incredibly scary. It's not like, oh, this is so fun and exciting. It's scary. What am I going to do? I don't want to leave. There's just a bunch of negativity that is in that person's filing cabinet. Is there a way to communicate with that person in seedlings? Just dropping. You've built such a great company here. Boy, what a legacy. Congratulations to you for that. And maybe that's all you say. And then the next conversation you have with that person is, have you thought about your legacy? What's that look like? Again, so it isn't overwhelming for that person, but it's very much given to them and doled out in the spoonful of sugar that it takes to get them more comfortable with this concept. Because this is why the data is so woeful. You look at the companies that are no longer operating in Western New York, and the majority of them were really good companies. They just couldn't make this transition. So how do you communicate to more of this person as they're describing, Jean, is more of that in the DISC language, more of that study, more of that compliant, not
Well,
that more
no,
extrovert.
I would almost say they're probably from the baby boomer generation, but they're an entrepreneur. So I can't guess on their style. So don't use silent as the style. I think the generation is that they don't speak up a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Generation, but they're an
Well,
entrepreneur or it could be
and
a
I
high
think again, I would
SIC.
I would still go back to the fact that it's how do you just start having this conversation and bringing this person towards the reality that you hate to see him go out in a coffin.
So it sounds like start planting the seed, asking questions, and raising their status by acknowledging their legacy.
Yeah, that's what I would say, just piece by piece by piece by piece, and see what they react to, see what resonates with them, and you'll start to see,
We have
even,
some more feedback. So they're 82 years old
oh my
and the
God.
type that work until they die.
Yeah. And what a shame, right? Because I imagine if they're 82, they've really, really built a good company. So I mean, I would definitely, definitely be trying that more legacy track. And again, honoring them, honoring their position and status. Because I'm telling you, if they're 82 and they're still doing this, what's going on in their filing cabinet is no one is smart enough to do it. They're the
Or they
only
just
ones.
don't even know where to begin to do it. They don't even know
There's a
how to
lot of
develop that
ego,
quick.
though, attached to this, Gene. When you look at that generation, it was part of their being. I don't know who saw the article that Russell Salvatore wrote for Business First in 2025, and he said, "This is my family. I barely know my grandkids' names." So you have to remember, they come from that generation where work was first,
Hmm.
not family. Now we've made that generational transition. So that's why I'm saying you need to really be thinking about where do they come from? And then how do you just start asking questions, not telling them, because that will not go well. Just say, what you've built here, what would you be so thrilled to know, that is long standing. Do you see this as a legacy business? I mean, even asking something like that, they might say, no, when I die, I expect this to close. You just don't know. But I think, again, asking questions is what takes the brain to the rainbow. Beautiful colors, because it's having to leave its file folders and literally conjure up something that might not be as tangible from its perspective. So I
Or I
think,
can say
again,
a shameless plug and say invite Joan to dinner with this gentleman.
yeah,
And you can do all the talking.
I know, because right, he would be my oldest guy who right now is 78. So
Yeah,
I could
yeah.
say I have someone older. then yeah, that's true. Alcohol always helps too.
That's true.
Fine
That's true.
wine, fine
Yeah.
wine. Yeah, awesome.
Very good. Well, that really kind of ties us up, right? I think we're down to the final 5 minutes of that. What would you like to add? Closing remarks, closing questions, comments, or concerns?
We're here. I would just say we're certainly here for you. You know, we don't come from a place of judgment. We believe that somebody else has that particular job covered. We come from a place of understanding and challenging that status quo. But I think, you know, again, I applaud you taking the time in this beautiful holiday month for this reflection. And I think one of the best resolutions that anybody on this call can do is just the gift of a pause, just the gift of a pause. You know, somebody asks you something, you have an opinion, whatever the case may be, check it. You know, is what I've got going on in my perspective accurate? Did I get an email from my boss and maybe misinterpreted it? Do I have a disconnect with Sally that perhaps we need to reboot and re-advance? I just think that gift of pause, you will not get to neuroplasticity without the gift of that pause and having that clear perspective. If you are in high levels of stress, you are in high levels of drunkenness. I mean, that is something we've heard loud and clear from Eric, is a drunk brain looks very, very similar to a highly stressed brain. And
Yeah.
most of us have been in either one of those positions.
And one thing I'd like you to speak to is another question that came through is that you hear a lot about burnout, but how do you deal with team members who are more of a slow burn, where productivity and engagement begins to have a slow decline? How do we turn these former top performers around and get them back on track?
I think what I would say is probably the most important thing that you can do for the workforce going into a time of uncertainty, political unrest, AI, technology. Do I have my job? Do I have my skills, etc.? What I would honestly say the best you could do is give people certainty. And if you are not giving them some form of certainty, you will absolutely see high levels of disengagement, high levels of burnout, all of those type of things. Jean and I had a client that was looking at repositioning a leader and gave us the job description. And we have really high level software that my son has built, and we put it into a time appraisal. And basically, the job description was written for somebody who could work 70 hours a week. And the
Mm,
president of the company was shocked that the duties and responsibilities were so robust. Well, they were when you put the pen to paper. Is it time to really look at the job descriptions? Is it time for you to give a team more of an understanding of what success looks like in very specific metrics? Is it time for you to re-look at your vision, re-look at your mission? Do people want to be part of your team, or is it just the Sour Patch Kids?
yeah, I think that's
You
great
know,
advice.
yeah. So
Yeah,
certainty. Jean, all the way. I would just go back to your word, audit.
yeah. It's in 2026, going into it is a good time of year to do that
Mhm.
type of audit. And the I want to address the one of the first questions is, what type of assessments do you recommend? Do you think the leadership team should take a personal inventory or a personal assessment? And you did a great job with, hey, use these slides and kind of just do an audit of what are your views about each generation. But at APA, we do use assessments, and it comes from a neuroscience lens from our assessment center called Target Training International. And we do actually have leadership assessments. So if you're looking to really and understand what's in someone's storage system, what are their behaviors and how they relate to the job? What are their motivators and how do they relate to the job? Key competencies that are developed. What is their emotional intelligence? Can they handle conflict? All these things that come into play when you are a rising leader or looking to develop into a leader, you can actually measure and then formalize a training plan based on those gaps. So
But I
measure
want to
the
make
talent to the
sure,
job.
forgive me for interrupting you, Jean, but I know we're on our last couple minutes. I want to
Yeah.
make sure, even though that is an assessment that we solicit from neuroscientists out west. Everything from a brain-based perspective and in the multitude of ways that we take that assessment and customize it is an in-house specialty that we have. So you might take that assessment, but we take that assessment and then look at it in relation to your stress tolerance. We look at it in relation to how much time are you wasting. We will literally go into people's Outlooks calendars and we'll compare it to their assessment. And then we'll put them in positions where they can get time back. I mean, we use an assessment like no other organization that I'm familiar with in the professional development space. We are truly a concierge firm. So that I just wanted to make sure we got that pivot in there.
Yeah, thank you.
It's our unique selling proposition without a doubt.
Yeah, agreed.
Rachel, thank you. Well,
Thank you
Miss
for hosting,
Rachel.
Rachel.
Thank you.
I know she's been quiet, Rachel, when she's really awesome, Rachel,
Oh, thank you.
from a good generation.
Behind the scenes.
Yeah, it dispels the myth. Yeah, there you go. Rachel, anything you want to add in or bookend on this?
No, I think you covered everything.
And
All right.
just go to our last slide, Joan, so they have our contact
Sure
information.
can.
That'd
There
be
you
great.
go.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yep. So any additional questions, comments, or concerns for Joan, just contact Caitlin at apasolutions.com. But I did put in the chat really quick that if you're interested in a sample of one of those assessments that we've had, I'm happy to give it to you at jean@apasolutions.com. And then we can chit chat what your needs are and how you can apply this great webinar to your everyday life.
All right, that sounds wonderful. Happy holidays, everyone. And thanks so much for spending this time with us. It's been a joy.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good night.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye now.